Welcome back in, Geico Outkick Studios. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us. We are joined right now, as we are every single Tuesday, as you can probably tell by that walk-up music. Petros Papadakis at the Old P, AM 570 LA Sports, wildly successful Petros and Money show. He is in the house with us right now. Petros, I'm actually curious on this. Were you watching when Anthony Davis hit his three to give the Lakers a 2-0 series lead, or were you potentially watching the football game that was going on at the same time?
Well, I was in a TV studio, and you know what that's like.
Okay.
So
Yes.
we saw all of it, and people are certainly excited about it. But it seemed like in L.A. today, more people were excited of just about seeing the Death Star, and last night, and everybody wanted to see what was going on with the Raiders, as they are kind of Los Angeles' de facto football team. But the Lakers thing is a big deal. It's probably going to become a bigger deal, but at the same time, it's not here. And the biggest star, I keep telling you every time that we talk about this, the biggest star in NBA basketball in LA is Staples Center, and who is there, and the scene around that downtown area when the Lakers are doing this well. And frankly, we haven't seen that in about 10 years in town, and we haven't seen it this year either. So there's certainly something missing, and anybody that tries to act like there's not is fooling themselves. But there are people excited, and I did happen to see it live. I kind of was offended by the Anthony Davis is a Laker now tweets because, frankly, he was a Laker last summer when they traded for him. And there's been a lot of guys who have been Lakers. Some have had great success. Some have not had as much success. Some are forgotten, and some will be remembered forever. But the in-the-moment rhetoric of rooting in our sports world is always, you know me, Clay, a little annoying.
Yeah, there's no doubt that it can be a little bit annoying, almost as annoying as the Pac-12 ridiculousness. And I know you've been fired up about this for a while now. But as you sort of look around, now we know the Big Ten's coming back. There's talk the Mountain West is going to come back. Even the MAC is talking about coming back. And it seems like, based on the most recent storylines, that there's probably a very good chance that the Pac-12 will be playing maybe by Halloween, although who the heck knows at this point. How would you assess the overall status of the Pac-12 right now, particularly because there was a story out yesterday afternoon that said Pac-12 officials gave themselves, I don't know if you even saw this, gave themselves bonuses before they furloughed or laid off half of all the Pac-12 employees. I mean, this conference has not looked good throughout this entire process. And you can criticize the Big Ten, right? I mean, people can criticize the Big Ten, but at least the Big Ten players, the fans, the athletic directors, the coaches, they all fought as hard as they could for the league to actually play. The Pac-12 kind of just meekly accepted the fact that they weren't going to be able to play.
And there's a guy in Oregon who writes at the Oregonian and works on the radio. He's like the voice of Oregon, John Canzano. And he's been saying this for years. That's the thing about this, Clay. What's the status of the Pac-12, you ask me? I have to ask you, in regards to what? Because it's not really about the pandemic. The pandemic just pulled more of a sheet off of it and showed you how meek, which is a great word to describe them, they really are, and how much they need the Big Ten just to walk across an open field. It's amazing. And given that they're the West Coast and they brag about the West Coast's innovativeness and all the different things that they have at their fingertips in the San Francisco Bay Area, at the Silicon Valley and all that, they've made no inroads, even though they say they have the best testing and doctors. They didn't make any announcements about it till long after everybody else did. So, but the problem really is it's not the pandemic. It's a decade ago. The one thing the Big Ten does, even though it's been a dumpster fire for the last couple months, is serve its schools. Rutgers makes a buttload of money being in the Big Ten with Ohio State. The one thing the Pac-12 doesn't do is serve its schools. It does a terrible job of that, and that's been a decade-long problem. And we know the two reasons. I always tell you, USC is terrible, and they don't pull their weight as the flagship, and the TV deal is even worse, to where after a decade, there's a $100 million gap between the Oregon States of the world and the Mississippi States of the world. So this is just further proof of that. The thing that bothers me the most, Clay, and you understand this as a guy who has to put out content every day, not just on the radio and TV, but the website, which takes up a lot of your time, I know. And there is so much wasted space and inches of writing about this testing and that, and the Pac-12, and Clay Helton was working behind the scenes and blah, blah, blah. All of that is complete BS. There's only one reason the Pac-12 is playing or trying to play or moving towards playing, and that is because everybody else is playing. And they are being pressured into it. It has nothing to do with any of the rhetoric that comes out. Well, now we have it. No, you have no clarity that you didn't have 6 weeks ago. And it's just it's sad, but it's also indicative of West Coast football, especially for the last decade, which is a day late and a buck short.
So if you are, let's pretend, you were a Pac-12 athlete at one point in time. One of the questions that I get asked frequently by people is, hey, what do you think as you go forward in this universe of recruiting and everything else? Would you think differently about going to a Pac-12 school compared to an ACC or an SEC or a Big 12 school? And I raise that as an issue because kids today are less geographically constrained than they might have been when you and I were growing up, and certainly when our dads were growing up. And the reason why I bring that up is I think it's because they're able to stay in touch with friends a lot easier. So you don't, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I wouldn't think you necessarily get as homesick as you did before because you can FaceTime with your friends wherever you are. You never feel like you're that far physically away because of the contact. But do you think this has a lasting impact? Or do you think in 2 years, most people, assuming we have gotten through the coronavirus and everything else, this is a story, but kids have short memories and it's not actually going to impact decisions? It's
a great question. And obviously I can't answer it. But the football world, as you know, covering football season by season, the previous year begets the next year, like the Bible. So everything works off of the year to year. The interruption is a huge unknown. Now, there's always going to be that guy in Los Angeles that is a great player who was never going to go anywhere else but USC. And to a lesser degree, there's that guy in the city of Seattle from time to time. But that's kind of been my message to you from the get-go in this. It's not about what's right or wrong. It's not about any of that. Who's to say? What it's about is leverage for the future. And football is about keeping up regionally. And God knows if that's the case, we're way behind already. But the message being sent is, these places around the country take football more seriously than where you live. All the great football players, many of them, are in Southern California right here. It's the most fertile recruiting ground in the world, year in and year out, along with your Texases and Florida. But everybody knows about California players. It's not a secret. And if you're in Oklahoma, if you're in Clemson, if you're in Alabama, you're telling everybody in the football world, and in Ohio State, and all that, we're more serious about playing football than the places than where you're from. And it's a pretty clear message, and it's kind of hard to argue. And that's the other thing about this. All of these coaches, to a man, they're all vagabonds. And the guys talking about science at Arizona and Arizona State or Oregon or whatever, they'd be saying, well, we just can't wait to play if they were if they were at Wake Forest right now. It's just regional rhetoric. So all of it it's so obvious to me and so damn tiresome of what we have to go through to get where we're supposed to get. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, regional rhetoric, by the way, would be an incredible name for a college football podcast because basically all we do is sit around and argue about oftentimes teams from a regional basis. Yeah. It's the last great bastion of regionalism. Speaking
and that's
of,
the beauty of our sport. I'm glad
that's
you
right.
said it like that, because that's the beauty. But it's also what's holding us back in this unprecedented time. I'm sorry that I said it. I hate all the commercials with the slow piano and the people on the Zoom. I can't. If I see another one of those, I'm going to kick a hole in my Westinghouse TV. But the point is, I just in these times, which are very, very odd, you're right to say that. I mean, we love college football because it's so haphazard, because Stanford and Ole Miss have nothing in common, and they could play in a really fun game. Like, that's what we love about the sport, that regionalism and the personality of the coaches and the place and the history of the school. Now, in that cauldron is a lot of problematic stuff, but I don't think we should forget that as we're sitting here tearing our sport apart every single week. All of this incongruity is kind of what we like about the sport, from yelling about the BCS to how many teams should be in the college football playoff.
Yeah, it is. That is interesting to think about as well. Speaking of interesting, so what do you think ultimately ends up happening? Like, the Pac-12 comes back October 31st, and I know they haven't been in the playoff very often, but one of the challenges that both the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are going to face is, given the fact that the playoff committee, College Football Playoff Selection Committee, is making their decisions on December 20th, they aren't creating any leeway at all for themselves in the event that they have issues on a school, or they have to cancel, or they have to reschedule. Yeah. And so you could end up with a school like USC playing, 4 or 5 games as opposed to 7 or 8. Same thing could happen to Ohio State through no fault of their own. How does this thing play itself out? Because the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12 are going to have a bunch of weeks built in where things don't have to go perfect. It seems to me like the Pac-12 and the Big Ten have painted themselves into a corner where basically everything has to go perfect for their teams to be able to play in the playoff.
And there's no doubt about it. Hence the sense of urgency to try to get back and play once all these other conferences watched in horror while college football started to be played across the country week in and week out. I mean, that's why we are where we are. It has nothing to do with mitochondritis or testing or antigen or any of the stuff that they're writing about. I don't know what the testing protocol is in the Sun Belt. It's probably just they grab your balls and you cough. But either way, I mean, they're playing. But none of this is happening in a vacuum, Clay. I mean, the ESPN has a deal with the Pac-12, who has a deal with the Big Ten, who has a deal with the College Football Playoff, who has a deal with the SEC, who has a deal with the ACC, and so on and so forth, in the Big 12, if I didn't mention it. So everybody's going to get married, and we'll all scream and yell about whose resume is correct in an even more haphazard year. But that's how it's going to play out. Because no one was going to wait for the Pac-12, so they got to get off their ass and play some games and fulfill their promise to these kids. And it's kind of sad because all of this could have been done weeks ago. But because people are too scared on the West Coast to step up and take the slings and arrows, my radio partner said it quite well. Why didn't Clay Helton say anything? He was too scared to say anything and be attacked on Twitter, on the West Coast. Instead, they hid behind their players and had their players write a letter, which is so
and also
and shameful. But that's what a lot of these coaches are scared of, the political backlash here.
I don't think there's any doubt. And also, Clay Helton isn't exactly on super solid ground as a Pac-12 coach. Maybe Pete Carroll could have been more outspoken if this had happened in, let's say, 2005 and USC was the straw that stirred the drink in college football. Maybe he would have been able to be outspoken like Ryan Day and Ohio State were, although I still think you probably would have had some sort of cultural shenanigans going on where there's a difference between the average person who's paying attention to what goes on in L.A. that's different than Columbus, Ohio, or Birmingham, Alabama, or places where college football is in many ways the heartbeat of a region.
Well, that's what drives me crazy about this too, Clay. It's like, real quick, about the state stuff and the state won't even allow them. Look, giant Hollywood studios have had an exemption since March. All kinds of people have a government lobby and get exemptions for all kinds of crap. You're going to tell me you can't exempt Stanford, Cal, SC, UCLA, Fresno State, Davis, and San Diego State?
Somehow they're... Yeah, I was going to say somehow they're managing to keep in L.A. I mean, I'm assuming that the Rams and the and the Chargers are practicing somewhere in the vicinity of California, not to mention the 49ers, and they're getting exemptions to be able to play. So, yeah,
they're not
I think
in
it's
LA
a little
County.
bit of
They would
right,
be.
but
I mean, they probably would have them, but it is funny. The Rams are up in Ventura County, and the Chargers are down in Orange County.
I mean, didn't the Lakers get an exemption a long time ago to start being able to use their facility in El
Warner
Segundo?
Brothers Studios has had an exemption since March. It's
Yeah.
Disney has an exemption. These places are gigantic business parks. All kinds of businesses have lobbies and extensions within the government, which is why this should have been happening behind the scenes if Larry Scott had any influence with anybody months ago with the governors but he has no clout. He's not a leader, and that's why we are where we are for the last 10 years. And the worst part about it is we've seen how bad it is for 10 years. You hear stories about Larry Scott and the Pac-12 taking bonuses and furloughing everybody or paying billions of dollars in rent and all this crap, and still no one acts. No one does anything. University presidents don't do anything. The ADs don't do anything. We just sit here and wait for it to solve itself like a bunch of idiots in an insane asylum.
How would you assess the overall LA sports market right now with the Rams looking really good? They're 2-0. I'm going to get to a quick question about Justin Herbert here in a minute and everything that was said by Anthony Lynn about his decision on who was going to be the starter in the next game. But you've got this beautiful stadium that is open that nobody's allowed to be in. You got the Lakers, who are right now in the middle of a Western Conference run where they haven't been in since 2010, I think. I mean, it's been a while since the Lakers were there.
10 years.
You certainly have, 10 years. You have the Dodgers, who are going after their first World Series title since 1988, and I think it's going to sneak up on a lot of people. But the baseball's regular season doesn't have that many games left, and then, boom, we're going to be into a crazy postseason.
Yeah,
There's
what about all the guys that
on.
tried to cancel baseball like 2 months ago?
They've lost that battle. Yeah, they lost that battle, and not only is baseball going to be playing, but we're going to have a bigger, I think 16 teams in the Major League Baseball postseason, more than we've ever seen before.
Yeah, the Dodgers are starting to shake people loose, and they have. They're the best team in baseball right now, and a lot of people are excited about that. We talked about the bubble and all that, and that's popping off. And really the biggest story in L.A. and the most watched game, believe it or not, and I was shocked when I saw it, and I rarely talk about ratings, but this one was pretty telling, was Justin Herbert. Was that this kid ended up starting the game. No one knew he was going to start. It was a surprise. And they were hanging with and beating the world champs at SoFi. And everybody kind of tuned in for that. And that was pretty interesting that became the story of the day. LA loves a shiny new toy.
They do indeed. What did you think about what did you think about Justin Herbert, who I know you watched play quite a bit at Oregon? I thought he was pretty phenomenal in his first start, especially given he didn't have a lot of lead up to the fact that he was going to be playing. Went out, I thought was fairly dominant, and made one bad decision. And now Anthony Lynn is like, oh, there's no way he's going to start in week 3. That surprised me that he's going to stick with Tyrod Taylor. What do you think, and how would you assess his performance based on what you would have expected given all the games you watched him play at Oregon?
Well, he definitely stretched the field a lot more than Tyrod Taylor did in the first game.
I mean, he's got a cannon.
Yeah. But, it's one thing to have a cannon. It's another thing to stand up and throw it in your first NFL football game. And that's what he looked like the player I saw in college. And that's one of the great compliments you can pay a guy. I'd say the same thing about Joe Burrow when I saw him last week and then the next week. I was really impressed with him. He's got a big, beautiful body like Cam Newton. He knows how to use it in the run game. He's athletic. He's nimble. And he's not scared to stand up and throw it down the field. He's, like you said, he made a bad decision. They're going to have a lot of ups and downs with him. But whatever coach says, and he came on the show yesterday and talked about it, and coach is a pretty straightforward guy, and he cares about tenure and saying the right things and sending the right message to the guys on the team that are veterans. But overall, this is their first-round pick, their top 10 guy. This is the anointed future of the Chargers franchise here in L.A., at least for the time being, unless you're going to pull a Josh Rosen. And it certainly doesn't look like that's the case right now after the small sample size we have. And eventually this kid's got to be the starter. I'm surprised that he was first out of the tunnel. I mean, other than Burrow, after I thought Tua would be the first guy out. But you think about how the Chargers the way they were offensively in Cincinnati, and the receivers they were open, and Tyrod was having a hard time finding them. Then he had a hard time breathing before the game, and they took him to the hospital and all these weird circumstances. And Justin Herbert just looked like, and I'm sure he'll have setbacks and all that, but he looked like the guy that people talked about he could be in the NFL. They protected him very well with the run game, and obviously there's no one in the stadium and all those weird different variables this year, but also no preseason, and it's hard to tell about a quarterback until he's in and out of the huddle and the clock's running and he's directing traffic out there and improvising when the bullets are live. And like you said, I was really impressed.
Appreciate the time, Petros Papadakis. We will talk to you next week. Enjoy all the games in the meantime. By the time we come back, we'll probably have baseball basically set for the postseason. We'll see whether the Dodgers can be on a run, and we'll talk to you again. Appreciate it, my man.
Just happy I didn't get bumped for like a Supreme Court guy or anything.